Koutou katoa, welcome to this workshop for the Water Service Delivery Plan Implementation. This is information from the Waters Working Group who have been developing, help working with Martin Jenkins to develop technical inputs for a report that's going to come back to Council. Today is being recorded. Just like to say there is some issues with the plumbing in the building, water, toilets and what have you, so we'll just watch and brief over that at this stage.
Yeah, at this stage, we'll let you know in half an hour whether we can continue using the building or not.
So just wanted to note that Councillor Patterson is an apology, and also Councillor Maxwell will be a little bit late. We've got Councillor Lee joining us online, and we have Nick Davis online with us again today as well.
And Councillor Rotorua Lakes will be 15 minutes late as well.
He's already here.
Yeah.
Thank you. So maybe would you mind, Councillor, starting us with the karakia?
Kia hiri tātou. Kia tauterangi Māori ki tēnā tātou, kia mahia te kua māki kia toi te kupu, toi te mana tui. Māori kia tukuturofi te whakamuwa kia tīna haumie huie tātou ki.
Without too much further ado, I'll hand over to Craig Tiriana, and he will give us a full introduction through the next parts of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Nui kia koutou katoa. Good afternoon, council, councillors and colleagues, and also those online, and welcome Nick. This is sort of starting to get to, I suppose, the delivery end of what had started as a bit of a journey several years ago. We are starting to pull together the inputs that will create the draft report, the final report from the working group that will come to councillors. And I think I indicated when we last met that we'd be coming back to finish off these technical inputs, which we're going to talk to today. Just a real high-level overview, largely for those who might pick this up as information and amongst our engagement and see us online. The working group's been active since late November. They've had about 7 hui to date, I think, to work through the various topics, and we are starting to see those inputs coming through now, which you were sent through to have a look at prior to today. I'm on the slides. Yeah, thanks, Russell. Just very quickly across today's agenda, this changed slightly from the one that was in your original pack, and that's my apology, because when I dragged the furniture slides over, I didn't update this one until I saw it this morning to say what was on today's agenda. Otherwise, we were going to talk about what you talked about last time we were. So a little bit, we'll go over a couple of the slides that are hanging around, and Nick will talk to the technical subjects, in particular the financial assessment, where that currently sits, what is the working group's thinking and some of the recommendations that are emerging. Same in the ownership representation and governance making space. We will have an opportunity to talk about a draft implementation plan, and that's always delivered with the caveat that's if it's required. But good planning means we have to look at that, because if a decision is made to push the button on something, we need to get it going pretty quickly into next year. So that's why that's there. Thanks, Russell. I think you guys know that as well as I do. Today is about sharing the evidence that's emerging and what decisions this evidence is leading to. This is probably important, and I think Councillor Rotorua Lakes said to me last time about how relevant it is to keep stepping through how we got here and the importance. So in our water service delivery plan, which was adopted last October by the government, or endorsed by the government, it was adopted just prior to that by council. Our decision was a multi-staged approach to water service delivery. Obviously delivering it in-house now until a date until July 2028, and then it may be delivered by a multi-council organisation, depending on what's in this report that's emerging. and depending on what that decision is made, whether to participate or not. So that's sort of the outline of the decision that we currently have trajectory on and the working group is working towards. As I said, the working group meets monthly. I think back in March, we talked about 7 strategic objectives, which are also in the pack we can have a look at very quickly. Those are to help us largely drive the assessment conversations, which are starting to happen. Previously, as a council, in my time here since I came on as the program manager, we've discussed this topic and the emerging program and the updates of it since the induction in November 25. We had a workshop in March. That was where, for a lot of you, the technical side was introduced, but also Nick was on that call then, and we also had Max Baxter, who's the external advisor to the group, who came along, former Mayor of Otahuanga, who was involved with the early stages of Water's done well, so he's been able to provide those perspectives into the conversations. So we had that workshop in March. I did a progress report with Stavros into the infrastructure committee in April. It was really just where we were tracking, and also talking about some of the reporting and some of the, I suppose, some of the other work was happening in the organisation around the creation of water service delivery plan, which is due later in the year and will be consulted on early next year. And then the last workshop we had, which was in late May, which was looked at the content that was before the working group at that time. I think we had a real brief introduction to a couple of subjects like that we're going to get more depth on today. The strategic objectives, and I think they're littered throughout the work that's starting to emerge as the draft's been created, is, you know, what are the things that need to drive, not so much that the decision is the decision based on what you think of these things, but these are the things that good water service delivery will provide for our community. It will put these things off against everything else. So it's not a case of one or the other. It's how do you work those all into whatever you're thinking. That's a high level of the entire program as it's been going. We're firmly in those red diamond stage where I think we've got scheduled in a couple of weeks when we get the draft report, a workshop with you to go through the draft report and get some feedback. I just can't remember the exact date, but that's going to the working group next week in Kawerau for them to have their cast their eyes across it, make sure it represents what the discussions have been, and then to feedback to the respective councils. Probably go past that one picture. So, again, this is where the working group's up to. The work's flagged for the working group until essentially it comes back to the councils, and they'll have to determine what the working group role is post that. I haven't been in any discussions for that yet. So, and I think in the last couple of working group meetings, this is probably an update, and Michelle can offer something, and Andrew might even be able to offer something. And the members of the working group, where there's been discussions around iwi engagement across the collective. And I think what I've put here is we had our conversations that we've started here, and we had a plan of what we're trying to do. Each council has been going down that path. There was a direct approach by some Eastern Bay iwi chairs to a meeting in Whakatane a couple of months back to how could they be better involved, or could they be better involved from their point of view. That's been discussed, and we're in the process of how does that work. From a Rotorua point of view, we've given our views during this conversation as to how we're doing our engagement, but I think it's just important to reflect that. Michelle, offer some depth to that?
Yeah, so when Kahuragi and I sat down to draft the engagement plan, we recognised that our district is a lot different to those others. So we recognise that we have 2 wastewater treatment plants on Māori-owned land. We have discharge to Māori land. We have 2 joint consents for water take with Karamutakana and Rotorua. So that changed the direction of the iwi engagement, because while they are landowners, they still sit within their relative iwi landscape, and we had to navigate that. But that actually has impacts, and we're seeking legal advice at the moment on the trajectory of the decision, whether we decide to go to a CCO or remain in-house, because as for joint consent, you actually need their consent as well to transfer it to a CCO. And then obviously when you've got assets that sit on Māori land, they need to be coming to the party as well. So that's sort of where we're at the moment. I've got support through Te Rangi Māori, who's a RMA lawyer, who's coming through and doing the engagement with those entities alongside iwi chairs, because they want to be part of that conversation as well. We've allowed that to happen, but I guess for consideration for yourselves is it looks a lot different for us here in Rotorua than it does for Whakatane, Kawerau, Portuguese, actually the whole of New Zealand. We're the only district that have these agreements and joint consents and land ownership. So when the final report comes in and legal advice becomes available, we'll just make that available to you. And then obviously the conversations with those land blocks or those landowners and how we support that. So.
Sorry for the interruption. I'm just going to duck out and send a message to staff, because we will not have operating the building for the rest of the day, so we need to send. It's nothing related to our ability to do
Three Waters.
Next, to notify the working group.
We will carry here for as long as you are able to carry, okay?
So you need to go to the so yeah, if you've got any questions, happy to answer, but that's where we're at the moment. Anything from anybody?
Well, it's time to bring Nick on, and I'm told he's there, but I haven't heard his voice at this stage, so.
I'm here, Craig.
Thank you, Nick. So we're in your hands. I think everyone has seen Nick a couple of times on screen. He's been with us since March, so principal is very clued up in what's going on with waters and has been involved in some discussions across the country as well as ours. So he's been providing great support to the program team and his team down. In your hands, Nick.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thanks for inviting me back to provide an update on the progress of our investigation of the Joint Water Services CCO. The purpose of this session from my perspective is to present the same information that's been presented to the Waters Working Group at the last meeting. So in June at the last meeting, which was hosted by a Potiki District Council, the Waters Group worked through the 3 reports that I understand have been distributed. So one of those is an update on some information that we previously presented to you back in April, I think it was, on the financial assessment. And now we're also moving through into the discussions with the Waters Working Group around the ownership, representation and governance arrangements for a potential joint entity, and also if councils choose to proceed to establish a joint waters organisation, then we've also outlined what a draft implementation timeframe might look like. At the moment, in terms of where we're at with the process, as Craig has explained, we're preparing for the meeting next week. At that meeting, that's the first time the Waters Working Group will consider the draft report in its entirety. So I guess just to recap on the process that we've followed to date, we've been working systematically through the issues, starting with those strategic objectives, identifying and describing the options, the service delivery models that are being considered, running those through an initial strategic assessment. On the basis of that, undertaking shortlisting of the options. Now, the Waters Working Group's also considered detailed assessment around stormwater, and as a result of that, has listed a joint Three Waters CCO. So that is the model that we have continued to refine as we've proceeded through the investigation, and obviously that's been considered alongside the existing in-house service delivery arrangements. So those are the two broad options that remain on the table. So I'll move now to present the updated sort of financial assessment. Last time I presented this to you in April, we were looking primarily at a 10-year assessment. I walked you through last time the scenarios that were being assessed, the financial sustainability assessment framework, and the core modelling assumptions. So I'm not proposing to go back over those today. We also showed you the results of initial modelling that we'd undertaken just looking at the 10-year LTP period, which concluded that a joint water services organisation could deliver water services at a lower cost to consumers than individual councils can undertake through their existing in-house service delivery model. We noted, however, that when we presented the analysis last time, it was just our interim assessment because we felt it was important to extend that analysis over a longer 30-year time frame based on council's infrastructure strategy. And in our view, it's really important to assess the options over a longer period because it takes time to make these changes. The establishment and transition costs are up front, and the savings, accumulate over time. So if you cut off the assessment at 10 years, then you don't get the full picture. So today I'll walk you through the extended 30-year assessment, starting with the outlook for capital investment. So the top graph on this slide shows the aggregated capital expenditure profile across the 4 councils over the next 30 years. And importantly, you can kind of see that a lot of the lumpiness that you tend to observe at an individual council level because of large-scale projects gets smoothed over in the aggregate. And that is one of the benefits of aggregating service delivery, because one of the key arguments for a multi-council water services organisation is the ability to aggregate capital planning and delivery, to take a longer-term approach to asset management, including taking advantage of the opportunities for standardised design, strengthen supply chain management, and the driving efficiencies through a long-term procurement approach. So we've modelled what we believe those efficiency gains could look like from taking that sort of long-term, more sophisticated asset management procurement approach and getting those economies of scale. And what you can kind of see is that through the accumulation of what we believe are relatively modest annual efficiency benefits, you can potentially accumulate up to $185 million of savings over a 30-year period. And again, we consider that that's based on conservative assumptions. Move to the next slide. So this is it's a similar story when you come to look at operating expenditure. There are different drivers of operating savings. So operating savings come about because of improvements in asset condition, improvements in the use of technology, energy efficiency initiatives, and savings in corporate costs, including sort of combined billing systems, procurement, and greater buyer power as well on the operating cost side. And whilst the percentage efficiencies are more modest in terms of operating costs, the larger total operating spend means that you get similar levels of cumulative operating efficiencies. So in the order of 180 million by FY54. So when taken together with the capital savings, the combined scope for efficiency in our view is in the order of $365 million before transition costs have been accounted for. We have in our report sensitivity testing to that. So, we've made allowance for, what if the efficiency gains are lower than we've assumed here, notwithstanding that we've taken a pretty conservative view to begin with. And under any of those scenarios that we've tested, there are significant gains to be had. So the combined efficiencies, there's two potential benefits, obviously, from efficiencies. Either those savings can be ploughed back into the infrastructure and used to increase investment, or alternatively, they can be banked and translated into lower average water charges per customer. So on this slide, we show the price paths for each district based on a cost to serve approach. That means that each district bears its own costs, including debt servicing costs, but the efficiency benefits gained from taking an aggregated approach are shared in proportion to the underlying costs. So for Rotorua Lakes Council, you can see that a water services CCO results in a lower price path relative to in-house delivery. Other councils also see lower water charges, but the relative savings are slightly lower for other councils in the area because they're already operating very high levels of gearing within their in-house service delivery models. Move on to the next slide. This makes it a little bit clearer. You can see the relative price benefits. Over 30 years, the benefit to Rotorua ratepayers is estimated to be around $216 per annum, or cumulative savings of just over $5,500 per connection. In real terms, that's today's dollars over the 30-year period, which represents a 9.1% average real saving. Next slide, please. A further benefit of establishing a water services organisation is the potential for additional financial flexibility afforded to councils as a result of transferring water debt to the water services CCO structure. And you can see on this chart we've shown what the council's debt position looks like, including Three Waters, and what it looks like excluding Three Waters. And the grey bars on the chart show just looking at the water activities, what the water's debt to revenue ratios look like. So you can already see there that there's a difference between Rotorua and some of the other councils in relation to the level of gearing. And so that translates on the previous slide into those more significant cost savings. But in terms of this slide, more modest gains in financial flexibility. But nevertheless, you can see that as a result of transferring water debt to revenue, there would be some gain in the council's overall debt to revenue ratios, and therefore greater capacity to invest in non-water activities, or simply to maintain greater borrowing capacity to cope with shocks. So there's a resiliency benefit there as well. Obviously, for the other councils within the wider service area, they're seeing some pretty substantial benefits here in terms of councils' financial flexibility, excluding water services. We move on. The other thing that we've done in the latest version of the report is we've explored the implications of, what if one council chose not to participate in the multi-council water organisation. And to illustrate the implications, we've modelled two variants. So on the screen, variant B there illustrates a scenario where what if Rotorua chose not to participate? And variant C illustrates a scenario where Kawerau chose not to participate, and there's no hidden meaning behind any of those scenarios. It simply reflects the implications of removing the largest and the smallest councils to see what difference it makes to the modelled outcomes. So if you turn to the next slide, and this is the final slide in this block, the results of that are pretty clear. Rotorua, being the largest and most densely populated council, offers significant benefits to the other participating councils through enabling access to those scale economies. Under a four-council model, the indicative water charge per connection averages around $2,890 across the four participating councils, whereas under a scenario without Rotorua, that would increase to around $3,410 in FY34. So that's a $520 annual difference just within the next few years. And by comparison, removing Kawerau makes around a $50 difference per connection. So while there are still benefits to those other councils from combining, at least as far as water charges are concerned, the benefits are a lot more marginal without Rotorua's participation. So I'll pause there. That's the last slide in relation to the financial assessment report, and it's probably a good idea to kind of take questions or comments at this point, Craig, before we move on to the ownership representation and other matters.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors, on that information so far?
Oh, thank you. If I understand this correctly, and it's just what you've said in your in the last couple of minutes, is it Rotorua's participation that is going to bring significant cost savings or efficiencies to the other councils? So, I mean, without our participation, they'll probably get some cost savings, some efficiencies, but it's our participation, Rotorua Council, that's crucial, I guess, to the significant combined efficiencies of all.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to? I can give a view, but you're the independent man here, so we'll get you to tell him exactly what it says in the paper, which I think confirms what Councillor Tate is saying, that without our it doesn't get as good.
The others.
Yeah. Is that correct, Nick? Yeah.
That's right. I think you've summed the situation up pretty well. I think there would be benefits, potentially financial benefits. There are many reasons to consider establishing a water services CCO, but in terms of the financial benefits and the savings, they would be more modest if Rotorua didn't participate for those other councils, and that simply reflects that we're talking about network infrastructure here, and the scale of Rotorua's assets, network, population and density actually make quite a significant difference to the extent to which efficiencies can be obtained. So that drives a significant difference, and it's probably almost a universal finding across the country, is that where you have a metropolitan or city, larger area participating in a multi-council water organisation, then the assessment of benefit tends to be quite a bit more material than if you're talking about smaller rural provincial council CCOs.
I'll ask a second part to that question then. So that means the transitional costs as well are going to fall largely or the large part of it, will fall on our council as well. Would that be correct?
Well, this is two parts to that question. So firstly, what tends to happen with the establishment and transition costs is that they need to be funded by somebody in the interim, but ultimately they are capitalised and so form part of the debt and of the water services organisation. So there shouldn't be a rating impact, if you like, on ratepayers from funding the establishment costs. In terms of how those costs are shared around, it tends to be proportionate. I think Rotorua, by virtue of being the largest council, would probably bear its water customers would bear a larger share of the cost, but effectively those costs get defrayed across all four councils.
Councillor Lee online's got a question, I believe.
Councillor Lee, over to you.
It's on mute.
You're on mute, or maybe.
Oh, no, can't hear him.
No, we can't hear you. Send it into chat. You can do that.
Sorry, councillor, we couldn't pick you up on the sound. Yeah. So maybe just send it through on the chat if you can. Is there any other questions in the room? Brown?
I'm not sure, no accountant, but just picking up on what Mary Beckett's talking about, how does the debt to revenue differences, how does that intersect with efficiencies for other councils? Our balance sheet appears to be pretty strong. As an example, he's 5.5 times worse off than we are if you're looking at debt to revenue. What's the intersection of that part of the balance sheet versus efficiencies gained?
Are you able to answer that, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. I'll have a stab at it anyway, and if it doesn't address the question, then feel free to ask for clarification. So they're somewhat independent aspects of the proposal. So when it comes to the efficiency side of things, what we've looked at is the scope for efficiencies across just the direct operating costs. So those are the staff costs, energy, chemicals. The costs are involved in operating and maintaining the assets and the corporate shared costs. So we exclude interest or finance costs as part of that, and we also exclude depreciation. So we're just looking at the scope for efficiency and running the business, if you like. And then similarly on the capital side, all we're looking at is the expenditure on the infrastructure itself and the scope for efficiencies there. So the efficiency estimates are totally independent of the balance sheet and the debt aspects of the CCO. In relation to the debt to revenue ratios and the different results you see there across the different councils on the previous slide, we haven't formed an opinion in our work about the merits of that. What that reflects is that different councils have adopted and chosen different financial strategies over time when it comes to funding investment in water infrastructure. And I guess one of the things that we see is that with these sorts of assets, they tend to have quite long lifespans. And so when things like wastewater treatment plants or water treatment plants or pipes approach their the need to be replaced, then it drives quite significant increases in costs at a point in time, and it's usually pretty efficient to use debt, and actually intergenerationally fair to use debt to kind of fund that investment, because you need to spread the costs of that over a long period of time. And so different councils can be at different stages of their infrastructure investment life cycle, which can result in quite significant differences at different points in time. So, but what happens essentially as part of the process of establishing a water services organisation is that there would need to be verification and confirmation of the debt for each council, and that would essentially, what would transfer would be the assets from that district and the debt associated with that, under a cost to serve pricing approach, which is the basis for the modelling here. Then each district is essentially isolated from the debt of every other council. Again, it's the fact that Rotorua's got a relatively low level of debt relative to water revenues and relative to other councils helps with the financial sustainability of the overall entity. But it's not as if Rotorua water customers would be paying for the higher debt servicing costs associated with those other districts, if that makes sense.
I think so. Just another question, if I may. On page 15, the table suggests the biggest savings percentage-wise land with Rotorua, 9.1%. However, on page 18, without Rotorua, just trying to, how does that marry? Because we get the biggest cost savings, but if we don't participate, no one gets the comparative savings. Just struggling to understand how they match.
When Rotorua is excluded, the overall level of savings is substantially reduced. So that the scope for efficiency gains, for example, is a function of the size and scale of the overall capital program and the overall operating cost. So if Rotorua is not participating in that, then the absolute level of savings is lower, and there's less to spread across those other councils. And on top of that, some of those other councils are starting with higher levels of water charges to begin with. So those savings aren't anywhere near as significant to them. One of the advantages of a water services CCO is it can increase the capacity to fund investment through borrowing, and Rotorua would certainly enjoy that capacity for an uplift in utility financing approaches. But as I said earlier, the other councils are already having to run quite high levels of debt, water debt, so they don't get those same sort of benefits. So there's sort of two sides to the coin here. There's the lower charges for water customers, and there's the increased financial flexibility to councils in terms of shifting that water debt. And Rotorua benefits more in terms of lower charges and benefits less in terms of that financial flexibility. For the other councils, that sort of equation's reversed.
Okay, I'll let somebody else have a turn. I've got one more question though, if we've got time.
Ask it now. Oh,
Russell Scott Roberts.
Councillor Lee's question. Nick, was the graphs show no financial gain for around 10 years? Can you please summarise what this is?
Yeah, so again, I think this is partly a function of conservatism, but the way that the modelling works is that there are some establishment and transition costs that need to be borne, and they increase the debt on day one, and therefore also the debt servicing costs. and the efficiencies that we've assumed are pretty modest per annum efficiencies. So, you're talking in the order of sort of 1 percentage point per year. So, but they compound. So, and we've also assumed that the efficiencies come in slowly. So you don't instantly realize, the full potential for efficiency. It phases in over 3 years in the model before they start to compound. So as a result, if you're establishing the entity in FY29, you've got those upfront costs and you're slowly phasing in the efficiencies, then you don't really see the full benefits until after FY34.
Hopefully that answers Councillor Lee's question. If he doesn't, he can pop something more in the chat. Councillor Samford had a question as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is for sort of Andrew and David. Sorry to throw you into this discussion. Just on the net debt to revenue picture that we have here. So our net debt to revenue is going to be higher if we go with the CCO. Council excluding Three Waters is higher than council including Three Waters. Is that a concern? And how much of a concern is it?
I might ask David to answer that first in terms of the numbers, because I'd be relying on my memory. But what's our debt to revenue ratio excluding Waters, David? I thought our debt to revenue ratio without Waters was better than our debt to revenue ratio currently combined.
Maybe can I just orientate everybody to the two different axes on the so the left-hand axis refers to water. So I think it may be a little bit misleading. There are two different comparable axes there, but there is nothing in those numbers that we can be concerned about. Residual debt to
yeah, so I think the way to read that is the blue line. You look at the right-hand axis, and then for the darker blue one, you look at the left-hand axis. So if you look at the FY25,
okay, yeah.
Currently all of council is 200% roughly, and water is over 300%. So that's sort of my understanding was right. So without water, overall council goes down.
Better.
Council should the water debt move into a CCO, residual council's debt to revenue ratio will improve quite substantially. It's just at a different rate to the other councils because of their structure. But it's important. Confusing, but it's two different indices on the side. So the left being the dark blue for the water, and the right side being the light.
Cut it off.
Yeah, water on
Question from Councillor Lee. Just struggling CCO back in-house. Why should we have confidence that moving water to a CCO is going to improve financial performance?
Did you point down this way?
Well, so I won't be able to provide a full answer, but I can start that along, and maybe
I think Nick will be able to probably. If I have to, I can jump in, but I think I might know the answer. But you can.
I'll provide a little bit of context. So, I think it's very hard for us to say that a CCO guarantees X, Y, Z, anything, whether it's better outcomes, financial improvement, any of that. I think what Nick is trying to identify is there are opportunities which you're putting forward based on past experience, but if you go back to when the CCO you're talking about, Councillor Lee, was set up, I'm sure there were opportunities there that were then not realised, and therefore this council made a decision to wind it up, bring it back in-house. I'm sceptical about drawing direct connections between what happened to a previous CCO and what will happen in the future, but equally, it's not also fair to remove any lessons learned from previous to now. So there might be some lessons to be learned that are relevant, and there might be some lessons to be learned that are not relevant.
And Nick, I'll start the answer off, and you probably can provide more detail. But what we do have is a legislation that's been put in by the government to make these CCOs work, and there's higher regulation through ComCom and Taumata Aroa of what they have to deliver. So that's a different setting than what we would have had with the CCO we're talking in question, and how it was set up, and the way these are set up, and the way the debt's managed, and everything gives totally different tools to better manage a CCO than what we may have had ourselves. And that's because the legislation has been, I suppose, drafted by people to make CCOs work because of the water problem across the country. So the legislation is meant to provide an answer to managing that rather than just say, do it as you would have a previous CCO. We, in the past as a council, had the same level of investment and forward thought into setting that up or not. No one really knows. It's the result Stavros can probably answer too.
All I can say is that fundamentally it's a significant difference between the CCO Councillor Lee is talking about and this potential CCO. This potential CCO is going to have the legislated regulatory ability to generate revenue on the basis of recovering its costs. The early CCO was subject to having a revenue at the wisdom or at the discretion of the council, or their success in competitive markets, which was not there. So there are two entirely different models. All I wanted to note here is that what Nick has outlined in the model, it's a model. And actually forecasting what's going to happen in 20 years or 25 years has to be tinkered with, with a fundamental knowledge that there are a number of assumptions embedded in there too. I don't think Nick is pretending that is presenting a picture that is that accurate, but it says that all things being equal, and if this assumption come to materialize, this model versus that model provides some financial differentiation between each other.
Can I just add one more thing to what Greg mentioned? It's put into place. You said to make CCOs more effective, but can I say it's to make all water providers more effective? So even if we don't proceed with this change into a CCO, council will be subject to these additional regulations that Craig's talking about: revenue sufficiency, investment sufficiency, renewal of assets, funds for operation. All of those metrics that apply to the CCO will also apply to council.
Perfect.
Actually, one more question here from Councillor Brown.
If you're ready, picking up on what Stavros talked about, this is where I was going with my last question, is the assumptions behind, and Nick talked about efficiencies from staff, energy, chemicals, corporate. Are we testing those assumptions, or how are we testing those assumptions?
Nick, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we haven't in our modelling sort of separately identified, the levels of efficiency for each of those individual types of costs. We've simply, using those to illustrate where evidence suggests kind of gains can be found. What we've done is apply an across the board set of assumptions for operating efficiencies and capital efficiencies, and the evidence that we've sort of based those assumptions on ties back to examples where similar sorts of approaches to reform have been undertaken. So I don't know all of the ins and outs of the previous CCO model for Rotorua, but essentially what is being happening with water services reform in New Zealand is that it's recognising that water services and water infrastructure is a natural monopoly, and it's taking a natural monopoly regulatory framework, so similar to models that are in place for airports, gas lines businesses and the like, and so it comes with significantly greater scrutiny and transparency of operating performance and attention from the Commerce Commission as the regulator, and also as Stavros said, the independence that's afforded to these organisations to raise revenue and take a long-term view of asset management gives them greater ability to, plan for capital investment in ways in which currently those long-term views aren't really able to kind of be, or aren't typically undertaken. And so when you look at the evidence, from states of Australia like Victoria, where these sorts of changes have been made and where economic regulators have produced reports on the extent of gains, that those tend to support the assumptions that we've made in the paper. But Stavros and the other comments are quite right. It is a model, but it is a model that has some evidential backing based on previous reforms of these type.
So so is it the scale of the increased scale that brings the efficiencies, or is it the increased regulation that goes with these changes that brings about the changes in the efficiencies? Is it regulation or is it scale?
It's a combination of those things. I would say it's a combination of regulation, a combination of professional governance and management, and the ability to because there are workforce shortages and specialist skills as well that can be hard to, for every council to retain the ability to take that long-term view because of the revenue certainty. And in addition to that, there is also strong evidence that there are economies associated with scale and density in water networks as well. So it's the combination of all of those things rather than just being about scale.
Okay, thank you.
We'll take last question from Councillor Lee online.
So, Nick, question from Councillor Lee. Can you explain why the efficiencies would compound?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they don't compound forever. It's probably the first thing to say. In our modelling, we've allowed for them to increase for a 15-year period, and then they flatten off. That is again, it's sort of based on evidence from previous reforms, and it reflects the fact that when you operate water businesses at a subscale, they operate inside the frontier of what is possible in terms of efficient delivery. So you need to allow time, and typically it takes 10 to 15 years for these businesses to get up to a point where they've extracted all of the gains in terms of efficiency that they can. And from there, it's just your typical run rate of productivity improvement. So again, there's evidence that in the sort of the decade after these sorts of reforms, you tend to get higher levels of annual efficiency, and as time goes on, you still get gains, but they're much smaller because most of the easy wins, if you like, have been achieved in the early years.
We'll move on to the next section.
And Nick,
Sorry, just before we do, one more question.
sorry, Nick, I just heard you say that over time the efficiencies are not as noticeable as they were before. Is this not similar to many of the SOEs?
You possibly can. If you kind of go back and read books on the corporatisation of Crown businesses in the 80s and 90s, there was certainly a one-off element to removing some of the efficiencies. So there's a catch-up element. And then over time, obviously, there has been mixed performance across some of those businesses. So what we're talking about in terms of the compounding is allowing for some of that catch-up to occur, rather than simply assuming these organisations can get better and better and better forever.
Thank you. Just before we move on to the ownership and representation section, Andrew just wants to give us an update on the situation.
Yeah, sorry, and I probably regulation's a good segue into it. Technically speaking, we don't have water in this building. Actually, practically speaking, we don't have water in this building. Technically, that means our fire system doesn't operate, and it's actually not permitted to continue occupying a building without a functioning fire system in New Zealand at the moment. So kind of didn't want to stop the conversation exactly where it was, because I think it's important to pick it up at a logical point of time. But Madam Chair, my advice now is that we should probably wrap up this meeting and reconvene at another time. Unfortunately, yeah, this was a unplanned damage to part of the public infrastructure, which is, we weren't able to foresee, and it's cut water supply to this building and actually a neighbouring building as well. So technically, I think
no efficiency there.
Let's work out the root cause before we jump to conclusions. But I think practically speaking, unfortunately, we should wrap this up and reconvene at another time.
A good idea to take our CEO advice. Sorry, Nick, about that. We might just close off the session with the karakia. Would you consider doing that for us?
A good strong one.
Last one didn't work.
Kia tau katoa te atu atu tātou eri ki ai. Wharai te aroha te atua me te whiwhinata i tana ki te wairuta. Ake.
Been felt.